Good afternoon. It is 12 p.m., so we're going to get started. My name is Reggie Gamble, and I'm the Senior Associate Director of Alumni Relations, and I am delighted to have our speaker, Leanne Rodd, as well as all of our alumni joining us. And we had great response to today's talk. We have almost 170 alumni that responded, and so it's very timely. And it's a great way to kind of go into the fall season, just to take a look and refresh and take a look at our resumes, right? So this morning, we have Leanne Rodd from FlexProfessionals. She and her organization has partnered with us for about 5 years now, and it's been a wonderful partnership as she has provided career-oriented advice for our alumni at various levels. And at this time, I am going to turn it over to Leanne.
Great. Thank you, Rita. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. Great turnout, and I'm sure everybody has an objective for today, so we're going to jump right in because it has been a really dynamic job search landscape for people for the last several years. So today we're going to focus on resumes, and specifically, we're going to look at resumes at a very high level, what their purpose is as a selling tool. And then we're going to walk through the process, both around getting ready to write or edit a resume, starting with that self-discovery piece, and then specifically all the way from top to bottom through the resume with tips on firing up your accomplishments to really speak to the job that you're applying for, which type of resume might suit your job search best, best practices for putting your resume on paper or at least on a screen that you can then send away. And finally, throughout, but mostly at the end, we're going to go through some of the newer things that we've seen both from the employee side and from the employer side related to AI and how that's impacted job search, how it's created some challenges, and also how it has created some opportunities for people to use those tools to better their resume and their job search in general. So just a little bit about us, just why we even talk about this information. So we are a flexible staffing resource for small and mid-sized businesses. We've been in business since 2010. And so from the beginning of when our three founding partners started the organization, we've really been dedicated to redefining the landscape of flexible work arrangements. We know that flexibility is a big word. It certainly is bigger now than it was 4 years ago. And it's not one size fits all. So it evolves with every person's need over the course of their career. Some people never look for it, but a lot of people do at some point. So whether someone's balancing their family commitments, pursuing personal passions, or a new business, scaling back for various reasons, we're there to help connect with professional, meaningful roles. So our objectives are to help people stay in the workforce during times when they're looking for flexibility, return after a career break. We work with a lot of people who have taken breaks for various reasons. Most recently, a lot of people are taking elder care breaks. Or people who are transitioning to a new field. Often these overlap, so we'll talk about that as well. And we are in both the Boston and the DC markets. We work about half of our jobs are part-time, and about 30 to 40% are full-time flex, and the other little bit is project-based, and they really span location from remote to hybrid or sometimes fully on-site. So we're not a fee-based service for job seekers, so people can join our talent pool at no cost or obligation. It's a confidential kind of enrollment, if you'll call it that. And then we work to try to match what someone's looking for in their job search. So jumping right in, we're going to start at the super high level, 10,000 foot and above level of looking at what is a resume. So at a very high level, it may seem like a silly question to ask. Well, it's the document that I'm preparing to apply for a job. Yes. But really, in essence, it's a summary of your functional skills, the expertise that you've accumulated throughout your career, new things that you've learned or developed over time. It's also a summary of your personal qualities. These might be things like how you communicate, organize information, and so forth. Those are those softer skills that you take no matter what your job is. It's certainly a kind of chronology, if you will, of your accomplishments so that hopefully employers that you're talking to are going to be able to connect the dots between the type of experience that you've had and what you're looking to do in the future. And then your work history. So, how long you've been at different jobs, promotions that you've had, maybe a little bit about the size companies that you've worked for or the industry that you've been in, and career pivots and those sorts of things. But at its base level, it's a selling tool to get you noticed. We get a lot of questions in these types of webinars and also just in general about resumes and what should be on it, how you should write it, where it should go, how long it should be. And to some extent, the answer to that question is always, what are you seeking? What's the job that you're trying to land next? Because so much of that answer to that question is going to tell you what you put on your resume and what you really focus on. We have a trouble, right, letting go of past work accomplishments on our resume as we accumulate them. And that's completely understandable. What ends up happening is if we have this huge chronology and really don't give someone the things that we want them to focus on, is that it can get a little bit cluttered. It's all good stuff. We just don't have a way from the recruiting side of really noticing what it is that you want us to see in relation to your candidacy for the next position that you're looking for. So we're trying to keep that in mind. On average, employers scan resumes for about 20 seconds. This might be generous some days. So recruiters, whether they're at a staffing firm or an internal employee at a company, view many resumes every day, sometimes 100 or hundreds. And despite what we hear in the news about AI and the hiring process, most companies, 99% of companies in the US are small businesses and nonprofits. And so those organizations account for a little bit more than 50% of the annual hiring in our country. And for the most part, applicant screening for small businesses and nonprofit jobs are still done by people. So as AI has become more prevalent, both for hiring and applying, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So for now, we're focusing on the human element, since even with AI assistance and looking at resumes that are coming in for an open position, eventually there will be a person looking at your resume. So for now, we're going to focus on that. So your challenge in either editing or creating a new resume is that we definitely have all become lazy readers, right? Sometimes we are used to skimming information. We get so many emails every day. We're trying to process news and other things coming in. So we've gotten really good at skimming. So right away, you're going to need to just be aware of that someone's going to start looking at your resume and then be deciding pretty quickly whether or not they're going to be continuing to read on for you as a candidate as a match for a position. Resumes are always an art versus science. There are many, many rules that you'll hear as you're updating your resume. If you ask 10 people, you might get 10 different answers on how you should do something. So keep in mind that you probably have some unique circumstances throughout your career history. You may have a layoff or a company acquisition. Maybe you took a career break or scaled back to do something and then are scaling back up. You may have a career pivot, you've gone back to school, you've done upskilling, whatever your unique situation and circumstance is, may lend itself better to portraying that information in one way versus another. So bear that in mind, that there are some general guidelines and rules, and I'm going to share them with you today. And if they don't fit your unique circumstances, don't feel like you have to really put yourself, if that round peg into the square hole. Do what's right for you in your career chronology, because you will need to speak to your resume. The goal of this is to, get through whatever computer system you're applying for or through a referral into the hands of someone who's going to say, yes, I want to interview this person for this job. And they're going to be referring to your resume when you're doing that series of interviews. So you really want to be able to speak to your resume and make sure that it's your own document. So step number one, and maybe step zero, because this doesn't really have to do with writing your resume, is to start with discovery. When people are getting ready to look for their next job, the first thing they think of, everybody does this, is to update their resume. It totally makes sense. It's that tool that we're going to be using. it can be really challenging for some people. So if you have a career gap, if you have a diverse or nonlinear experience or a career path, or you're making a career transition, you might be looking at your resume, or if you're starting fresh and you're looking at that blank sheet of paper, it can really be challenging. It may also be the first time if you've experienced a layoff or you've had a career break for another reason. It may also be the first time that you've really thought about what you want to do next. So often we move from job to job. We come out of college, we get that first job. It might morph into something different. We are then recruited or we decide to make a move until we have a chance to really step back and look at the experience that we've had and what we want moving forward. We may not have that opportunity to say, okay, what is it that I want? What do I want to pursue? I'm in this point in time. So this pre-step of resume writing is important, and it really helps set the foundation for just about everything that comes after it. It not only helps you get clear on what you're going to say on your resume and how you're going to say it, which experience you're going to choose to really focus on, but it's also going to give you the language, that awareness of what it is that you're good at and what it is that you want to do next. It's going to give you that language so that you can talk about that in interviews, you can talk about it in networking. So it's a really powerful way to kind of gather that awareness about yourself. So if there's one takeaway that I would want you to have at this point in getting ready to write your resume, is that it's important to spend the time getting specific, not only about what you're pursuing, but what strengths you bring to the role. So it's worth taking a little bit of time to do this. So how do you do this? That's all great and fine, but really, how do you step back and make that assessment and discover what it is that you're pursuing next? So if you're willing to take that step all the way back and say, okay, what are the characteristics that I consistently convey? Maybe no matter what the job is or where I am in my career, these are those softer skills. And then what functional skills or competencies have I developed that transfer across work settings? So this might be from industry to industry or different job levels. And then combining that with the skills that you want to use in your next role. People sometimes forget that, right? So we've had a career path and we've tended to do one thing or a couple of different things as we've made our way through different jobs. And sometimes we forget the jobs are really a big part of how we spend our day, and that having that be personally meaningful time is important. We don't have to all be saving the world. Not everybody is going to have like a nonprofit impact, but we want to be learning. We want to be having a sense of contribution, meaningful work in some way. And so really the skills that we want to use in our next role are going to be important. So this is the foundation as we're moving forward. And then we'll drill into a couple of these areas. So first, starting with characteristics, if you're feeling stuck on defining some of these, here are some resources to consider. The characteristics, remember, are the softer skills. So this is where some assessments can be helpful. The Myers-Briggs or MBTI and Clifton Strengths Finder is a great combination. They're commonly used together. The MBTI really looks at how you get your energy, things like, are you extroverted, introverted, how you gather information, make decisions, and when you kind of close off that information gathering, and can give you some insights into how you do your work. Where Clifton Strengths evaluates your strengths across 34 different areas. These are things that are activities like influencing people or relationship building. This is an example on the right of someone who's top 5 are harmony, relator, learner, responsibility, and empathy. So as you start to combine that with how you do your work, you're going to get a sense of the types of work that you're drawn toward. One of the things that's really interesting about doing the Clifton Strengths that I find is that they tend to be the things that are easy for you to do. If you're a good people person, you relate to people really easily. It's not necessarily that that's an easy thing for you to do. It's one of the strengths that you have that is innate to who you are. And you may not even recognize it as a strength. So I think this is a powerful tool just in affirming that those things that you think are easy, maybe are easy for everybody, really may not be easy for everybody and are specific to you. So Other resources, the Department of Labor has an interest profiler. They've got a couple of tools. This mynextmove.org is an interest profiler. It's pretty basic and like a lot of Department of Labor tools, it's a tiny bit clunky when you go to see it. It doesn't look super sophisticated, but what it does is it really asks questions. It's going to evaluate where your strengths are. And then it's going to help try to align you with some career fields. So it's a great place to start if you're starting from scratch. You may also refer to some performance reviews that you've had from people in the past. Maybe if you have written references, some of us have those in our file and we can look back and see what people have said in the past that we're good at, and that kind of feedback. And then I'm sure UMass Lowell has some of these in their resources for job seekers as well, but this is an example of an alumni resource from the University of South Carolina, which is a quality worksheet. And so the basic way that you would approach this is you would go through and you'd start to check up all of the things that you feel really describe you. And then you're going to edit it and you're going to kind of net it down to whatever those top maybe 3 to 6 or 7 different qualities are that you take no matter where you are. And so you can start to relate that to past experience that you've had. And as you're doing this, you're going to think, oh, that I demonstrated this when I did this thing in this job. Those are the conversations and the things that you'll refer to when you're interviewing. So again, it gives you that great foundation for moving forward. On the functional skill side, certainly you can look back at past job descriptions. That is one thing that will give you some information on what your functional skills are and that you're bringing. These are easier to pin down sometimes than those personal characteristics, but they tend to fall into 3 broad categories, either working with people, so managing, communicating, maybe you're in sales or you're doing event planning, working with data. So that might describe somebody who's in finance or some kind of problem solving strategy role. Working with things is the 3rd category. That's physical, mechanical. Maybe you're in the medical profession or you're really working in the design, interior design or construction field. So those are 3 general categories where people find themselves. Maybe you've got a primary foot in one and a secondary foot in another. That happens as well. And you may also start to think, this is another university alumni resource for functional skills, but you may also start to see that your skills fall in some broad functional areas. So if you do have a lot of skills, for example, within communication, you're going to know that that's a strong area for pursuing if it is what you want to do as you move forward. So again, aligning those with what you want to do moving forward, you're going to kind of net it down, reorder it, sift it, make some priorities. And again, the Department of Labor has a second tool, ONET Online, which starts to help align these functional skills with jobs and can tell you not only what people do in the jobs, but what some of the career paths are that people have had to get to those roles, including education, what some of the green careers are moving forward, where there's expected to be growth. So again, it's a great resource if you're doing some exploration. So we're going to move over to powering up your accomplishments. So we're getting closer and closer to actual doing the editing on your resume. This is another foundational piece that really makes the steps that come after it easier, so that you can connect the work that you've done in the past to the work that you want to do in the future. These are really the gold in making your skills relevant to the job that you're applying for. So you want to think about this as the breadcrumbs, right? Or the connection points in your career story that are going to help either the reader or the person who's interviewing you actually picture you doing the job that they have open. You know, if you put yourself on the side of the desk of the hiring manager, the problem that they have in front of them, they either have a problem or an opportunity. Somebody has left a role and it's open, so they're doing the work or their team is doing the work and they need somebody to come in and do that work. Or an opportunity has presented itself for expansion. There's a new opportunity for the company, for the team. Maybe they're doing their work differently. So if you put yourself in their chair for just a minute and think about what it is that they're looking to do, this also can help you when you're thinking about your accomplishments. For a lot of people, this is going to feel like bragging or just doing your job if you look back on the things that you've done. But bear in mind that your resume at its base level is your marketing document. So it's no place to be modest or downplay the successes that you've had or that you've had with other people as part of your team. And certainly not suggesting that anybody makes anything up, because you want to be able to speak to it and be genuine, but you really want to be able to help that person picture you in your role. If you are, just one more note before we move on, if you're in career transition, if you want to do something different than the last job that's on your resume, this is a really important place to start expanding out the accomplishments that you've had in the past. So if you've had a pretty linear career path and say you've been in finance or accounting, those are things that when you apply for that next job in finance or accounting, people looking at your resume, they're going to understand the kinds of things that you've done in your past roles. If you have been in a controller role and you're looking to pivot over to human resources from finance and accounting, the things that you need to power up in those accomplishments are the transferable skill sets. So for people in career transition, it might take, those bullet points. Maybe you're going to take off the top 1 or 2 that were really big parts of your job and elevate number 3 and 4. Maybe you're going to pull something in that really wasn't even on your resume, but that you did in your role, that demonstrates how you're going to be successful in the role that you're applying for. That's a little bit of a pivot. So we've talked about this a bit, but why do we focus on accomplishments? It really engages the reader. It allows you to tell your story, helps the employers connect those dots, and makes you memorable. So all great things when you're preparing these sections. These are the bullet points underneath each job that you've had. So I want to give an example, because a lot of people say, okay, I don't even know what you're talking about when you're talking about an accomplishment in a bullet point on a job that I've had. So this is an example that I might use. If I was writing my own resume, I could say, well, I coordinated in-person and virtual workshops for job seekers. It's not inaccurate. It just doesn't tell you very much about the work. It's better if I give it some kind of quantification. So 80 plus in-person and virtual workshops, and the reason why I'm doing that to expand company outreach. But I can go a step further. And this last iteration is not only conducted, but designing and delivering these workshops that, and they were annual, that were attended by this number of job seekers, outreach resulting in a 25% increase in the talent pool and increased placements and revenues. Some accomplishments are easier to quantify. So you also don't have to quantify everything that you've done. If you can quantify it, those are the little anchor points that as somebody's reading them on your resume are going to help you stand out and help them say, oh, I am looking for somebody to do something similar in this role to help us grow or help us reduce the number of client complaints, whatever their objectives are. So the more you can help them envision that, the better. And the way that you build this, if you have done some interview prep, you probably recognize this portion of the STAR framework, which is situation, task, action, and result. For resumes, it's the same, but it's in a little bit of a different order. So it usually starts with a specific action that you or your team took. Did you target emerging markets? Did you make some systems improvements? And thinking again about the people, project, process, what was the specific action? And then you're going to follow with the result. What was the outcome or the benefit and impact? And this is where, if you can start to quantify, great. If you're guesstimating, not guesstimating, but if you're estimating what that quantification was, if you think it might have been 10%, maybe 12%, and there's a number that you're comfortable with, definitely use that. But these are generally things that fall into the increase and decrease category. Maybe it's a count, a head count in a department if you're in a management role. Budgets that you're managing, or budget reductions, or staying within budget despite some other external circumstances. So really think about what those measurements could be. And then lastly, it's followed by the situation. So what was the problem or challenge that was resolved, or the opportunity gained? If you're looking for examples of this in your specific field, the Balance has great tips by field for including accomplishments on your resume. And as you start to pull those out, I am betting that you're also going to see those threads that we talked about earlier, because you're going to be, if you're pulling out your most kind of the things that you're proudest of as you look back over your roles, you're going to see those characteristics, those traits and skills, along with the functional competencies, but those characteristics that you're really weaving throughout every role that you have. So a couple more examples here. If your resume reads like it was a duty, like it could have been part of a job description, edit the weekly supplement magazine of USA Weekend, work closely with high-profile writers. That all sounds fine. These are actual examples from folks that we've interviewed in our company, and then showing the before and after. So really through an interview with this person, realized that she had edited more than half of each of the weekly issue of this USA Weekend magazine, maintaining standards of quality and harmonious relationships with writers, despite what we all know is a really big reduction in editorial staff for newspapers everywhere. So much more punch when she reframed it a bit. And the next example is a business analyst for the U.S. Army Budget Office, analyzed processes, created tools to eliminate redundancies, all sounding okay, but not very specific. So really digging in, this was two things that we discovered during the interview. One was designing a tool in Excel to provide financial updates to the Army Investment Department, and quantifying this by eliminating 28 hours of weekly analysis, manual analysis. Another accomplishment was creating an interface for storing and analyzing funding data, $200 billion in funding data, and producing reports presented to Congress by high-level Army officials. So if this is related and relevant to the job that this person is applying for, you can see how it really starts to paint the picture. So tips for demonstrating results. Again, you want to focus on the things that you're most proud of and that you enjoy doing. Some of these might be in unpaid positions. I had an interview with someone who had been on the board of a preschool, and it was in the volunteer section of her resume. And in talking about things that she had done, learned that that board had raised $250,000 to build a new building. And so we really got into, what was involved in doing that and what drove her passion in that area and how she might parlay that into something that she wants to do in the future. So just bear in mind that the accomplishments that you're most proud of might be in volunteer scenarios. And those are, as long as they're relevant to what you want to do in the future, those are fair game as well. You want to make the accomplishments stand alone so that, someone could pull that piece off your resume and really look at it as it's an encapsulated statement. If you're having trouble, look back and say, I was in that job and I deserved a raise because I did X, Y, or Z. And so that can help kind of get the juices flowing and really thinking about it. And I know that there's this resource on the UML alumni website in the resume workbook that they have, but you really want to look at some verbs that you can use that are action oriented and really steer clear of those passive things like responsible for or other passive verbs, really angling toward action verbs instead. So step 3, choosing the best resume type for your career story. Most people, 99%, 90% of people are going to fall into a chronological resume category. This is a resume that might start with a profile or key experience and accomplishment section. Maybe this one has a title at the top, and then it moves chronologically through your experience with the most recent job first. This is where most people are best served. This format serves a lot of people because it's how our brain works. It's really easy to follow. So as I know in our company, when we're interviewing people, if we start spending time drawing arrows on resumes and we're trying to attach different things that people have said in more of a functional resume, then we're not spending time really understanding how that person's going to fill the job because our brain can only do one thing at a time, right? So it's really easy to follow. The disadvantage with a chronological resume is that it does show a gap, or if you're in a career transition, it may not display the skills that you want to use in your next job very easily. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. On the flip side is a functional or skills-based resume. These work really well for someone that's in a job like a interior designer, graphic designer, that really stays pretty consistent no matter where they do it. They've used similar skills, the tools might change, who they're working for might change, but you really want to focus on the depth of experience within a focused area And in this case, this person has listed their core competencies, their skills, their tools, and then where they've done those chronologically. So it can work. It can help limit someone who's had a really long career gap. It can help maybe make that minimal in terms of standing out on their resume. But again, our brain really wants to work in a certain way. So unless you've had a pretty linear path, I would probably steer you toward a chronological resume. So moving over to actually putting this on paper, we want to start with the contact information at the top of your resume. These are some just very tactical tips. If you're using the header and footer area in Microsoft Word or other Google Docs, you want to be aware that those sections don't always work well within applicant tracking systems. Sometimes they get a little bit reordered or lopped off. So it's better maybe to just minimize your margins and to take advantage of that space. You really want to make your name stand out, large type, page 1, page 2, and then smaller font for the other contact information is fine. This is another question that we get asked a lot. If someone says, well, I don't want anyone deciding whether I am willing to commute to a location, so I'm not going to put my location. I'm just going to say I'm in the state of Massachusetts, or I'm in the US, or I'm just not going to list a location at all. That can be okay if you're applying into a job, but from the standpoint of coming up in a search, so we're a staffing group, we look at our resumes that are on file all the time for new jobs that are open. And if someone doesn't have at least a city and state, then they're not going to appear, because almost everything has a geography. So you really want to make sure that you have some locator. You can list a metro area, that's fine. You don't need to have your street address on your resume. That has become a little bit of a privacy piece, so no need to list your street address, and a professional email address. So if you have something that is just a little bit more hobbyish or personal, you could think about creating a quick Gmail or other provider email address, something that you check regularly that gives it a professional feel. And then including your LinkedIn profile URL is a great idea. It's another way for someone to get to know you. If you have kind of a complete and active profile, LinkedIn is a whole other topic that we won't get into today, but if it can help promote you as a candidate, then I would say link it in your resume or put it at the top of your resume as well. The next section is your summary, profile, accomplishments, key skill section. And the one thing that I would say is, this along with a title is very powerful in creating that first impression and compelling the reader to keep going, right? So if you assume whoever's reviewing your resume reads only this section, does it sum up the value that you're bringing to your job? For some people who haven't updated their resume in a long time, I know people of my generation, this used to be an objective section. It was really focused on what we wanted in our next role. It's really flipped over to a profile section. It's what those things are that we're going to be bringing to the next organization that we join, and could include some job titles or key skills that we've had in the past, but you really want to make it this 3 to 4 section narrative. Maybe it's going to have a couple bullet points, but you want it to be very powerful and succinct. Top skills, your level or years of experience. If you're an executive and you're looking for your next executive role, you're really going to want to indicate that and focus on your leadership and what the top things you've accomplished at your last roles. You're going to bring in maybe some of your strongest personality traits, the fact that you can really net down information in your public relations and present it in a way that is going to benefit your clients. Whatever that is, you're going to want to focus on what those top things are. You may have different profile sections for different jobs that you're applying for, and we're going to talk about targeted resumes as well. But if you are making a career transition, if you are coming back to work after a break, it is okay to show that in this profile section, so that if someone looks further down your resume and they see it's been 5 years, you can put that in as your last sentence in your profile section about that transition and your eagerness to do the job that you're applying for. So this is an example of a before and after kind of SAT style, where this is a very general statement. And I think this is something that we see pretty often, where when you read the profile statement, you're just not quite sure what exactly this person does. It's got a lot of good sounding business words in it: versatile, results oriented, organized, motivated, relationship builder, but it doesn't quite tell me, if you read this, what can this person do for my company? Is it sales? Is it operations? I'm really not sure. So in doing an overhaul, we're going to look at the after. Results-oriented business development professional. So right away, I know it's BD and sales with 15 years of experience driving growth for mid-sized government contractors, successful in developing long-term relationships, and so forth. So again, this could be a profile statement that you modify depending on what it is that you're applying for, but you want it to be true to your experience and really elevate those top 3 to 4 things that are going to be important for getting someone to read further and consider you for the job. Moving down on the resume, the next step is your career history or your professional experience. You want it to be chronological, but don't hide some things. So if you were, especially career transition, and you did something a few roles ago, you're going to want to think about how to elevate that up to maybe a key skills and accomplishments section to really pull it up out of your resume. You might have unpaid roles in your chronology if they were significant. If you were a pair of hands versus something that maybe was a little bit more strategic or at a leadership level for a nonprofit, but didn't get paid for it, it can work itself into your chronology. This doesn't have to be paid jobs only. You just want to make sure that it's relevant. So if you are, this works really well for people that have done quite a lot of unpaid work for maybe nonprofit organizations, and they're making that career transition from corporate into nonprofit. Sometimes those things can be really relevant to what they're going to be doing next. So that's okay to list in your chronology. Limiting or deleting older jobs and bullets that are not relevant is something that everybody has trouble with. Everybody that we work with, if we say, well, this thing happened 15 years ago and it was with a technology that doesn't really exist anymore, isn't being used in the same way, and it's not really relevant to what you're applying for. Sometimes these experiences that we hold on to, they're so special to us, and I have them too, and I don't want to take them off my resume because I did them and I own them. Just knowing that this is your marketing document, it's not your, biography, and that it's okay to take things off. It really is okay to edit. You want to make your company name and your job title stand out, especially if you have a company that you've worked for with name recognition. It can be, compelling from a brain standpoint for people who are scanning down through roles that you've had. Providing start and end dates, month, or actually years only is fine on your start and end dates. You want to show any progression that you've had. So if you were recruited into a role or promoted, that is a great thing to list as maybe in italics right below your job title, along with, say, just some context of, the size of the division within the company or what the company did if it's not a well-known company. But you can also just loop in there that you were promoted or recruited by, say, a coworker that goes to another company. You want to keep it simple, easy to understand, try not to repeat things over and over again, but really net it down to what those relevant things are that you want someone to know about you as you apply for this next role. Including volunteer experience on your resume, if it's not going to go into your chronology, you want to really think about, does it add value? This comes into play for a lot of people who've had a career break for caregiving, for example, and have done a ton of volunteering and really focusing in what might be substantive roles that they are relevant to that job that they want to approach, maybe where they've had leadership experience, if that's what they're angling for in their next position. You can combine it. You want to net it down to those most important things. And if it was treated like a paid role, it's your choice on whether to elevate that into your chronology. So real quick, before and after, this is someone who'd had a ton of volunteer experience over 8 years, lots of things. I don't really know where to look on this list and what's more important than others. And so she had netted it down to a couple of things where we can see now where she volunteered, what her roles were: board of director, gala host, a chair, president and committee chairs, various. So easier to read and easier to understand whether those skills are going to be important in what she's pursuing next. The education section, The one rule is the longer ago it was, the lower it goes. So the exception to this is if you, let's say you graduated from college 20 or 30 years ago, that will definitely be toward the bottom of your resume. No need to put your year of graduation on there if it was that long ago. Exception is that if you've had a recent degree, if you've gone back to school or you've done training, whether it's brick and mortar training or online training that's relevant to the field that you're pursuing, you want to bring that to the forefront. So you might have your education section that includes your college degree at the bottom. And in your key skills and accomplishments section, you might be listing that you completed a career path on Coursera, or that you did a micromaster's or maybe a master's degree. That might go toward the top, especially if it is going to show the relevancy for the job that you're applying for. And, also working in the fact that you're a lifelong learner, which is who doesn't, love to see that. So if you are a graduate that has, you've been out for 10 plus years, you're going to want to start to think about dropping off some of the things that you did in college, like clubs, maybe some lower level awards, summa and magna cum laude. I don't know if you would ever want to drop those. Those are really great honors, but other things, club work that you did, it starts to get replaced with experience that you've had over the last 10 plus years. So you can start to drop those off, as well as any courses or clubs that you're in. Certification, technical skills, memberships. This is an area that's going to vary for people depending on what it is that they've done in the past. You don't have to include everything. Sometimes people think, well, I'm going to trick the ATS and I'm just going to throw a bunch of things in there. Remember that you really have three audiences that you're developing your resume for. One is certainly a computer. Every resume goes through a computer now. But you're also targeting the hiring manager, that you're going to be talking to, who can actually make the decision about you for the role. And probably somewhere in a lot of companies, that in-between person, it might be a junior HR representative or a recruiter who is going to be just doing a general assessment. Do you have the right, the baseline requirements for the job that were listed in the job description, and how many of those preferred and next category of skills do you have? So you don't have to include everything, simple list. You do want to make sure that you don't outdate yourself. And so where we see this sometimes is when people are listing technologies that have really been replaced by something else, or listing something like internet searches or operating systems is another one. You don't need to do that unless if you're a programmer, and you've worked within Unix environments or something that's very specific to the work that you're doing. Those are fine to leave on. Proficiency in MS Office Suite is standard. It should be included though. So, and I'll give you an example. If we were looking for someone who is joining a marketing group specifically to do PowerPoint presentations, then for sure, when we're looking through our database of folks that we might want to reach out to about a position, we're going to be looking for PowerPoint. We're going to be looking for other things too. But if that's kind of central to what you do in your work each day or what you're applying for, you want to make sure that you specifically include it on your resume so that it's findable. And then indicate a level, basic, proficient, advanced, and expert. You can find those if you like on the Microsoft Excel, for example. You can find those on the Excel website. They've got categories for what would fall into all of those different areas. So the suggestion is really to have a go-to resume. If you have multiple areas that you're targeting, it's nice to have one that if you have to just pull it up quickly and send it somewhere, it is pretty good. It's general, but it shows most of the skills and the things that you want to do next. Targeting your resume for your next job, and we're going to talk about this a little bit as we get into AI and the impact on applying for jobs. But that's really one of the avenues for making your way kind of through the gauntlet. And I would suggest targeting for every job that you're serious about. You really want to make sure that the way that you're explaining your experience is in the way that the company or whoever's reading your application is going to understand it in relation to the job. It may require having a bank of, accomplishments that you're drawing from, depending on what they're looking for. It may mean, spending quite a lot more time on that one application than would be necessary if we just had a general resume that we use for everything. But it's going to have a much bigger return on investment for your time than just kind of mass applying. You want to be careful, you know, because as you can imagine, if you have a bank of things that you're kind of constantly bringing in, bringing out, you can create some errors in your resume, and you want to make sure that it's error-free when you submit it. But it's the targeting is really important. So if you have this bank of accomplishments, you can then target it for the specific language that someone's using in a job description, as well as what those functional skills are. You want to be memorable but authentic. So making sure that, you know, as you're bringing things in and taking them out, that you show the whole story, and that you're checking your spelling, grammar, spacing, etc. So we're going to look at AI. This is our last section, and then we'll move over to Q&A. But AI and the impact on hiring and applying. I mentioned earlier that for the most part, applicant screening for small business and nonprofit jobs are still done by people. They absolutely are. But it has become more prevalent and certainly more talked about. Small organizations could get into some AI tools if they're using platforms like Indeed or LinkedIn that have AI options built in. However, I will say that as a small business, working for a small business who uses both of those tools, that on job posts, filtering applicants is still done by a human being. So rest assured, a human will be reading your resume for most of the things that you're applying for. Where AI comes into play for small organizations is when they pay a premium for having those platforms suggest candidates based on either a job description or on, as say, an ideal candidate profile. And remember, small businesses, 99% of the companies in the US are small businesses, and about 53% of annual hiring right now is done by small businesses. So that does leave large companies. They hire a lot of people every year, sometimes in the hundreds, right, for the larger companies. And they do invest in robust applicant tracking systems, or ATS. They have to really help manage that workflow. And so the AI technology in some of these platforms allows recruiters to filter applicants based on those requirements, those, you know, the baseline skill set or baseline years of experience, degrees, et cetera, that applicants need to have in order to see those who only meet the minimum, and then maybe narrow further to rank candidates who have additional preferred skills or experience. And so the impact of automation and the job search and hiring process has really been on both sides of the equation. Because job seekers can apply to hundreds of jobs at the click of a button. If you've been on LinkedIn and you've used the quick apply function, you've been in this category. The hiring teams have to employ filters to make that review process manageable, because otherwise they're looking at, you know, hours and hours of someone's time to really start to filter those applications. So, as we moved into AI, this is a really big area. It encompasses a lot of things. And I'm just going to go over some quick lists of how it's leveraged for both sides, hiring and applicants. So hiring organizations definitely use AI to review and screen resumes, especially these are larger organizations, right? Maybe to mitigate bias. People have bias. Computers have bias. So there's bias everywhere, but hopefully to mitigate bias, maybe by excluding somebody's name, where they went to school, when they graduated, from an age standpoint, et cetera. Improve the hiring experience. So AI can maybe give some feedback if they're using it for those initial screening, if it's going to be maybe an on-screen Q&A, you know that you're moving forward. So that might be an improved experience, or you might hear that it's not a fit more quickly. Sometimes in predictive analytics, not necessarily at the hiring, like in the hiring process, but where companies might use AI in predictive analytics is who has succeeded in this type of role before? What was their background? What specific skills and experience did they have that maybe led to their success? So that's one possibility. And then maybe for creating recruitment and retention strategies. On the application side, you know, there are a lot of positive things that you can do with AI. It's not kind of the necessary evil. It really can help on both sides if it's used correctly. So it can be used to optimize your resume and your LinkedIn profiles, as I'm sure a lot of people have at least experimented with. Assist with resume targeting. So you can create prompts that help you evaluate your resume in relation to a job posting, for example, and how how do you fit? How does this fit? There are platforms that will do it for you. You can create your own prompts. What would make it better, and filling in those gaps. Some platforms offer AI-powered job matching. So LinkedIn is an example of this. You can set up job alerts. Those are, definitely there's some AI-powered where they're saying, if you're interested in this, we're going to expand out to say people who say they're interested in this also are sometimes interested in these other side things. You can do interview preparation and simulation, because some of the AI like ChatGPT or other chat simulators, the generative chat tools are generative and iterative. You can actually give it a prompt to interview you and help you practice your answers and simulate that. Setting up personalized job alerts, auto apply, skill assessment and development, and then maybe outlining cover letters and follow-up. So there are lots of ways that AI can be leveraged for good in the job search. On a basic level, if you haven't gone out and experimented with something like a ChatGPT before, just what is it? What does it do? It's a prompt, right? So it's generative pre-trained transformer using large language models to help give answers. So you're using a prompt to ask a question, and you can ask it with context, so the better the prompt, the better the response is going to be. You're going to give it context, you're going to give it some specific things, and it really can be a great way to generate ideas, right? So saving time, improving productivity. It can have, this is a little bit out of date. The new ChatGPT 4 is current through, I think, 2023 instead of 2021. It's a great way to just generate ideas in general. Some of the tools and tips that we can offer. Some of the tools that you may have heard of are ChatGPT or Google Bard. Microsoft has one. Perplexity is another. Jasper AI. There are so many, and these are just the chat platforms. There are others that work with specifically with generating images, logos. There's just lots of different ways that you can start to bring in this large language model to help you research and come up with ideas. Tips for using these tools are to be really clear and specific with your prompts. And we'll look at a couple of examples related to job search and resume. They're iterative. So if you do get an answer back and it's not really what you're looking for, you can talk to it like you're talking to a person, if you want to put them in that put it in that category, and say that that's not quite what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something that's more X, Y, or Z. And so you can have that back and forth and to get to an answer that you're really looking for, including things like setting a tone or how your output is formatted. So I want this to be conversational, or I'd like it to be more professional. I want it to be less expressive. I want it to use current business terms. I want it to align with this job description. So you can start to give it context, and then how your output is formatted. You might say, I want bullet points. I want it to be every paragraph to be below 180 characters or 180 words. So whatever context you want to give it, it will follow that. It has limitations, right? So you want to verify the output. Number one, it will fill in when it doesn't know the answer. So, and it may not always give you what you're looking for. So you want to be aware of what those limitations are, and really using it, I like to say, as inspiration, as opposed to something that's copy and paste. So specifically in using ChatGPT or other chat tool to build your resume, these are a couple of prompts that you might think about. I'm applying for a bookkeeping specialist job. The job posting, put in the job description and copy and paste it into the prompt. You'll have a very long prompt at that point. Can you update my resume to make it stronger for this job? And then insert just the body of your resume, not your contact information, and see what it says. And then make some iterations as you go forward. There are a couple of others. I've got a QR code for a copy of this, the slides for today that I'm going to put up in a minute. But there just are a lot of different ways you can use it for your resume, interviewing, even networking ideas. It's great for idea generation and maybe even developing a job search plan, helping you be confident in the language that you're using because you know you've compared your resume to the job description and you're really bringing it together in the best way possible. The con is it's not a person. It doesn't understand your story. It may provide conflicting information. You really have to comb through the output and use it as an outline or inspiration, definitely make sure that you're editing it to make it your own and your own unique career story, since if it is your resume, you are going to have to speak to it. So with that, I'm going to end. This is a QR code for getting a PDF of the slides, as I mentioned, and I will just invite you to connect with me or with us if you're looking for a job in the Boston or DC metro area. And email is here as well, and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Questions have been coming through the chat. So we have a number of great questions from your talk. And I just want to let everyone know, introduce my colleague, Amy Lee. She will also assist in identifying questions that come in through the chat as well. So Leanne, the first question that came in earlier was in regards to the job description and identifying keywords. Can you provide any tips on how to identify keywords, and also if there are a number of applicants using similar keywords, do you have any tips to make the individual stand out?
Yeah, great question. So I think as you're reading through, the first thing I'd say is pick up a highlighter, print out the job description, pick up a highlighter, go old school and start to highlight things that really stand out to you. Those are probably some of the key sections. You know, if you're highlighting and you say, okay, 5 years experience in something, that's probably a key section. You may also be able to glean that information by comparing job descriptions. If you're applying for a number of roles that have similar requirements around skills or experience, then they're going to have some similarities. You know, in marketing, for example, you might be asked to produce KPI dashboards, or, you know, it may call it something else. So you want to notice what the similarities are and what different companies call it if they have some different names for it. And then in terms of making your skills unique, they already are, right? So really the challenge is in relating the skills that you have, your unique background, to what they're looking for in the job. One of the valuable pieces is the terminology. So making sure that you're using the right terminology if it's related. If you did the same thing in a job, but they're calling it something slightly different, you may just want to make that one tweak in your resume so that as long as it's genuine and you genuinely did that, you own that, you can do that. But really relating it to the skills that you've had and making sure that they're on your resume.
Thank you, Leanne. So I'm going to combine two questions that came in. On one of the slides, a participant noticed that you didn't include education, and so in locations. And so just wondering, is that okay? And also, should they include previous positions without a description that are not relevant to a position that they are applying for?
So I just want to make sure I understood the first half of the question is not having an education section on your resume. Was that the first part of the question?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say if you have a degree, you always want to include it. You just don't need to necessarily put your year of graduation. If it's been 10 plus, 15 plus years ago, you can start to drop off your year of graduation, which also gives you leeway to not include all of your past positions. And it kind of comes into that category of what is relevant to the job that you're applying for. I've had plenty of jobs that don't relate to anything that I would be pursuing in the future. And I think sometimes there's this feeling of, you know, we need to have a complete chronology all the way back to the beginning of time. And sometimes that serves you well, and sometimes it doesn't. So it kind of depends on someone's roles that they've had and what they're applying for in their situation. But in general, you can start to drop some things off that are early career if they're not relevant. And if they are relevant, figuring out to keep them on, how to keep them on your resume.
Thank you, Leanne. So the question came in, let's see here, in regards to, just wondering, if individual cannot provide a number to attach to a particular accomplishment, is it better to give an estimate or provide nothing at all?
So if you're confident in your estimate, I think an estimate with a number is better than not having it, but not all jobs and things that people do for jobs lend themselves well to having a number, that tangible piece. And so you might have it in maybe one bullet point under a past experience that you've had, maybe two, and maybe you don't have any. I wouldn't fabricate it, but if you can make an educated estimate that it seems genuine to you, I would definitely include that, just because, you know, as our brains read through things, it helps give us that context of the work that you did. It can help to kind of give us the scope of who you were working with, what was the size of your team. And so try to be creative. You know, people who are marketing and sales, you absolutely want to have some kind of metrics in your past experience and probably in your profile statement as well. For people in other areas, you may not have access to that. And so you want to describe it, even in a general term, to decrease the number of client complaints. If you don't have the number, maybe you just show what the impact was instead of, you know, by 10% or whatever the percentage was. So it's okay to not have it. And if it's a role that lends itself well to metrics, you really want to make sure that you do have it.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Lee. I work with Regia at UMass Lowell. We have a lot of questions, Leanne, coming in for different types of how to structure your resume. So I know we're close to time. Do you want to continue to take them, or is there a way that we can follow up with some of these questions?
Sure. I'm happy to stay on for anyone for about another 10 minutes if anyone has the ability to do so, and certainly understand if people can't. So yeah, I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes.
All right, let me pull up the next question. We have, if you're working in one company and you've had several roles within that company, should you summarize those roles together or list them separately? What is the best way to do that on a resume?
So I think in most cases, and I probably would want to know the specific circumstance, but in most cases, I would make what's called an umbrella position. So it might be, I worked at UMass Lowell for these, you know, your 10 years that you were there. And then within that organization, break it down into the different roles. So if somebody had 3 roles, making each one separate and distinguishable. Why I think that's important is that it shows progression, shows career progression, right? So either someone was tasked with more responsibility as they move from one position to another. They may have moved from an individual contributor to a leadership position. They may have been promoted or even applied for and gotten a position that they applied for internally. And so I think it's important to show that progression within a company. So that's the way that I would do it. Sometimes people have, where I might not do that is if someone takes a position that is maybe a lower level than what they held previously. You know, you want to, you know, you set yourself up for success, but if there's a reason why maybe you were demoted, you know, just plain demoted into a position that was, you know, you had been applied for and gotten, but that was a little bit above your skill level or ability to do and put into a different position, I might frame it a little bit differently, but I think in general they would be distinguishable positions.
Okay. Another question we have is if you have multiple similar skills with different experiences, what's the best way to do that on a resume without repeating the same skills?
Another good question. Yeah, so I would say don't worry about minor repeats, right? So no one is going to read your resume as closely as you will. So you may say, oh, I repeated that, you know, 3 jobs above, and I don't want to say it again here. Maybe change your verb or, you know, switch it up and make it as much in context to that role or that, you know, specific outcome to that company as you can. But don't worry that somebody's going to say, hey, on page 2, 2/3 of the way down, you repeated something that you said on page 1 midway. You know, they're not going to have that level of detail with their reading. So I would say it's okay to do a little bit of repeat, but you may just want to switch it up depending on the context and the outcomes of that specific position.
Great. What suggestions do you have for 60-plus-year-old job seekers who are looking to move into another field? And what can we do to help update our resume in a way we're not considered too old or overqualified for a role?
Yeah, another great question. I think we could probably spend about an hour alone talking about, approaches and ageism in the workforce. It definitely exists. Most of the people that are going to be interviewing folks for jobs are in the millennial generation. So 60 plus, you will be interviewing with somebody who is younger than you are. But really, it kind of is the same answer as a lot of other questions, and that you really want to stick to what's relevant. If you are seeking a position that you are truly overqualified for, you're probably going to want to outline that in a cover letter. You might want to have a sentence in your summary statement that says why you're specifically seeking that. And you're probably going to be leveraging your network. It's people who are applying for a role that they could be perceived as being overqualified for, who have a gap or are making career transitions. They tend to do less well on paper alone. So complementing your resume with networking, with looking to see on LinkedIn who who your alumni folks are that might work at that company. Remember that a lot of companies are still giving hiring bonuses to their employees who refer a candidate who's hired. So bear that in mind as well. And hopefully you're using that multi-pronged approach and really making sure that the skills that you're listing are relevant to what they're looking for in the job.
Thanks, Leanne. Question came in about research and publications on a resume. Should they be included, and if so, where should it be included?
Yeah, so I think that kind of crosses over into the CV stage, right? So if you're in academics, if you're teaching, if you're in research, those are very common and needed things to have on your resume. If you are someone who, let's say, has been in research and is transitioning into something where those publications are not as important, you're going to want to think about maybe selecting one or two that are relevant to the job that you're applying for to keep on there. Publications are great to have on your resume. They're big accomplishments, and I think the more relevant those are to the position that you're applying for, the more common they are in the position that you're applying for, kind of is the answer to how many you keep on and where they go. They're typically toward the end of your resume. So if you have 2 pages, or maybe you're scooted over into 3, it's going to be near your education or your technical skills section. So that's where it probably would go. And I think it's the same on a CV as well.
Thanks. Question about proficiency in other utility suites like Google Workplace. Do you have any insight or suggestions regarding Google Workplace and other suites?
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to list on your technical skills section. If you have worked in Google Suite before, and you've worked in Docs, Pages, which is the equivalent of PowerPoint. If you've worked in Calendar, you're well versed in sharing things, maybe some Google Forms, anything within that suite, I would definitely include that in your technical skills section. It's used by a lot of small businesses. We use it at our work. We also use Dropbox. So thinking about what those the industry uses is important in that section, and Google Suite can be one thing that's helpful to list.
Thank you. We do have quite a few more questions in the chat, but we'll take a few more in the chat. But you can always reach out to Leanne following our talk today to ask any additional questions if we don't have an opportunity to get to your question. A question came in about what advice do you have for an international student who plans to use their work authorization, OPT, to work in the U.S. for 3 years when it comes to resumes or job hunting in the U.S.?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, it's somebody who has a work authorization to work during their time in the U.S. during this 3-year period. Is that correct?
It's a plan to use. It's the planning. It seems like current international student who plans to use their authorization OPT to work.
Yeah. So I think listing on your resume that you're authorized to work in the U.S. is important, especially if all of your past positions have been overseas or international experiences, so that there's not a question of, does this person need to be sponsored in their job? That's an undertaking for a company, and they may not choose to do that. So I think listing that, you're authorized to work in the United States is probably as far as I would go, maybe somewhere near the top of your resume, but I would just list that, and then stick everything else kind of in the same categories of those relevant skills and experiences.
I'm going to combine two questions, Leanne, it's around AI. What is the best tactic to avoid getting screened out by AI? And another question regarding AI is the wording in the resume. What if it's different, is different with the job description? Will AI remove their resume?
So, the first question, to avoid getting screened out by AI. So the job description is going to be looking at kind of base level requirements and then additional preferred skills or preferred experiences that somebody has. The closer your experience matches to that, the more chance that you're going to have to kind of make it through that screening filter if somebody is using. Remember that not everybody uses that. Sometimes even large companies aren't using AI features in their applicant tracking systems. So worry about it, but don't worry about it overly. But the closer your experience relates to what's posted in the job, the better chance you're going to have. Using multiple approaches to the job. Again, if you do have any network contacts that can help elevate your resume, that can also help. Then along the lines of the wording, so you always want your resume to be genuine. So if the job description has something that you really don't have experience in, but something is relevant but not quite the same, you don't want to switch those and insert one for the other, because you are going to have to speak to it. And if you want to be genuine in your interview, you want to be able to say that you have the experience that you've said you do on your resume. But let's say you're a marketing person and they're asking for HubSpot and you've had Marketo, which is a really similar program. Chances are pretty good that someone who knows that job description is going to not say rule out anybody who doesn't have HubSpot, right? They might actually put those words in there, or the platform might suggest it. So one of the things that AI has helped with in the recruiting side, we don't use this at our company, but know from recruiters at larger companies, is that for junior recruiters who don't know a job really well, it can suggest things. So if I said, I'm the recruiter and I'm entering my keywords to search for, and I use that last example of like, I'm looking for somebody with HubSpot, there may be a iterative question and answer that says, okay, which ones of these software platforms would also be acceptable? We see that in accounting. If somebody's looking for QuickBooks, is it online? Is it desktop? Would both of them be okay? If they're looking for Great Plains software or SAP, would other platforms be okay with, have similar experience? So it can be helpful in that way. But you just want to make sure that you're being genuine to your own experience.
This is great. This has been wonderful. I do see, Leanne, we're at almost 1:15. So I would just like to thank everybody so much for joining us, and thank Leanne. I put in a resource for UML Connect, but also we have an amazing career services here at UMass Lowell that you can check out. And I think what we can do, Leanne, if you're open to it, if anyone is interested in reaching out to you, if we didn't get to all of those questions, that you'd be happy to, follow up at another time. And we will also be sending the slides and all of the information from FlexProfessionals.
Great. Thanks for having me here today. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.